Welcome to the BPM 360 podcast. I'm Russell.
And I'm Casper. And together we will help you navigate the treacherous waters of the BPM adoption journey. I hope you enjoy the podcast.
Casper.
Hey, Russell.
So, our second episode.
Oh, yeah. How did you like the first one?
I liked it. And I thought it was good that we managed to set a framework for us to continue with the next episodes. And I think that's what we agreed upon, that we want to jump into each of these topics we mentioned around the framework, which we now have in our background here.
Yeah.
Just as a reminder.
Very conveniently, yeah.
We'll start doing some deep dives in each of these topics. And just following up on the last episode, I was thinking about, because we did stress also who this podcast is for, and what the real intention is, and also to a certain extent where we see the purpose in this, in our doing and communication. And one of the aspects I really liked as we left parted at the railway station was that we really want to spread positivity around the topic business process management without going over the top on just the pure classical marketing phrases that are out there. So we do both realize that it's a challenging topic. And typically when reaching out to the practitioners, I always experience that there's a lot of frustration as well out there. So there's two key messages we want to bring in. It's worth investing the time. You're not alone out there. There's a big community of people that have similar challenges, but we really want to show solution-oriented approaches. So we just don't want to sit there and sulk about all the how negative the world is.
Yeah.
Spread it positivity, but on a pragmatic, realistic basis. Yeah, so really getting people together to communicate and also give hints and insights on how to make things work, and also just to sustain the momentum that people have and to build on that. So that's I think is a roundup of the outcome of the last episode where we met, and also a bit of the credo for the next episodes on what we're doing and how we want to dig into the topics here.
Oh, cool. Yeah, because I totally agree. I mean, it's very easy to go all doom and gloom on implementing BPM because it's a vastly complex topic. But every complex topic was complex only once. After that, you can simply repeat certain things and best practices. So let's find those. And I like that there's this, well, you all know Simon Sinek. He has this podcast called A Bit of Optimism. And I like to think that we're trying to do that for the BPM community.
Yes.
So just let's dive in episode number 2.
True. Yes. And we covered the frameworks, starting with the sponsorship topic. And in here, we, briefly went into the 2 key aspects around the sponsorship and the stakeholders. And I think we want to dig more into the topic around the sponsorship, which is typically the crystallization point of BPM initiatives. Yeah, it's at the beginning and the end. Well, whatever that means.
Absolutely.
It revolves around the sponsorship. So maybe you want to just dig into the certain aspects around the sponsorship, and we just discuss what we think is vital to understand here when talking about this topic.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. So I think the first point I like to stress before we even dive into why having an executive sponsor is important is that whenever you start a BPM initiative, you can start it really small, and they typically they tend to start small, which is absolutely fine. It's perfect. So for the first time being, you would need, bless you, my friend, you would need to have a sponsor. The particular sponsor that we're talking about in this episode is the executive sponsor, and that is the person that you need to have on board if you want to scale a BPM project, either to a large part or maybe the entire organization. So everything that I would touch upon today is from that perspective, just to make that clear. Having said that, I think what is one of the main reasons why you need an executive sponsor? Well, I think it's not much more different than with any other project. You need somebody who provides a budget and who provides a mandate. I think these 2 things are quite important because without them, what are you going to do? You'll just be living at the fate of some free time that you have and some willingness that people show to help you. If you really want to do let's say a professional implementation of anything, you need mandate, you need budget. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Absolutely. However, when you say executive sponsorship, there's this ideal world where you go to the top, and there's somebody with a big budget and a clear mandate, and then he has a big idea and he says, "But I've got the time. Let's start off small." And he hands over the budget with the big mandate, and you start working. So the ideal world, yes, that's. I think everybody would say agree. It says any initiative, any project is best case. You have top sponsorship and clear mandate. Reality, I think, is more complex, and I think this especially with BPM, the balance between thinking big on holistic approaches and where you want to be. Understanding the journey there is very, as I said, it is more about building up capabilities in an organization, changing the company culture, going through steps of maturity on getting to this level. That requires a long span of intention for the sponsorship. Yeah,
True.
And I think especially the initiation point of your thinking starts, well, what does that actually mean? Typically, it's around some real pain point or one key initiative where BPM can prove itself, is that its key principles are valid.
And true.
There is this return on invest or even in investing it that makes sense because it does it more holistically than any other project-oriented approach. So I think here I think that the challenge is for this window of opportunity to address the sponsor, which could also be some kind of management board, and addressing them with let's say the elevator pitch on business process management.
True.
And this is where I see that there is sometimes it really is a narrow window of opportunity where certain even departments that have been thinking of revolving around process orientation, like quality management, lean initiatives, or even IT oriented, I'm thinking, projects or in IT departments, that is sometimes really is, I know it sounds terrible, but that's to a certain extent, it's a bit of pure chance that they said you have to identify and be attentive to say, now we have the possibility to speak up, develop a clear roadmap and lock it down onto a specific initiative that has a pay point currently in the organization that catches the attention of the sponsors for them to go in boldly and then state your case.
Yeah,
and that's something of I know it sounds. I think it's always really interesting to see how often we take sometimes weeks or months of fine tuning the offering, on the pitch, and then really getting in the right moment to get just this attention to then get the budget allocated for a certain initiative where we are positive that it will have a positive impact, and we set all our focus on getting this running, and then constantly feeding the sponsor with the feedback he wants to hear from the organization.
Yeah.
So as I said, the ideal situation is I think clear where one wants to be, and I think it's good that we do dig more into. So what do we need the sponsor for at the beginning, during, and long term?
Yeah.
What role does he play, and how can you actually develop him, and in the collaboration and communication interactively with the BPM initiative to keep him, on that high level of attentiveness that you require. But the starting point, the initialization point of grabbing the attention of the sponsor, that is something I think is super challenging.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they're always looking for the quick returns. So I think it comes down to identifying the real pain point initiatives that really are strategic, and where the company is struggling currently to get it, let's say, first time right.
But even Russell, if you go one step back, you might run into a situation. I mean, at the moment that you want to start up an initiative like BPM, one of the first things that you should be doing is determining who do I want to have as my executive sponsor, ideally. I mean, you can always have this little wish list to say, okay, I like to have that person or that person as an executive sponsor. And one of the main determination points, I think, is, does the executive sponsor that you have in mind already has experience with BPM, or is it somebody that you need to make enthusiastic about BPM? Because that makes a big difference in your approach. And just from my own experience, in my previous company as a chemical manufacturing, we actually had a executive sponsor, which happened to be the CFO of the company. And he came from another company that was already engaged in BPM quite heavily. That really helps. I assume and I know that's a luxury position that you have. But sometimes you also need to have somebody who's like a greenfield, and you need to put in considerable effort to I would say, to groom that person to be an executive sponsor and to educate that person so that he or she can exuberate the BPM mindset to his or her peers.
And here, I think around the topic of, I think we initially also started talking about, so what is BPM really about? And I think you mentioned transparency as one point. I talked about building the bridges, and we were talking about transparency and allocating accountability and responsibilities. And I think this is like, when you take BPM, the people sometimes have a rough or clear understanding of process management. Yes, it's important. They somehow allocate it somewhere. But I think on sponsorship level, you really need to address these topics around transparency and accountability as something where you can really grab their attention, because they typically they have their pains in, they look down at their organization, they have like their near peers. But when things get complicated, they want to be able to say, who do I put this on? Who do I put this task on? Who do I put the responsibility on? Who can I grab and say, look, why isn't this working? Or, you make this work. And I think what happens nowadays in these complex operations, the hierarchical organization as it's there, it's a boundary where people can duck away from real responsibility, from operational responsibility, because they can always say, it's complicated, or I didn't get what I needed to get to be able to provide. So everybody's going into these compartments, or can hide in these compartments. So principally you could say financials, it's your responsibility, but they say yes, but sales didn't manage the contract properly. So so a lot of this discussion around where are we really having problems gets diluted via the organizational boardrooms and interfaces you have there. So that's why I think the topic of having like end-to-end responsibility is actually then saying, I want to hammer this down, and my outcome is the, let's say, customer satisfaction based on some, let's say, metric like on time in full. And I don't want to go into detail having to manage each of your excuses why you couldn't do your job because he couldn't do the job, and vice versa.
Yeah.
So I think on this higher level, that's reflecting that you really have to think about what are the pain points of your sponsor, and what are really the means of process management that are really like tools for him to then be successful, and things that he buys into and says, I want to have that. I want to have clear responsibilities here. And I think this accountability and responsibility point around the process management is interesting because they have such dynamic organizations. So the companies, they're reorganizing, they're centralizing. And along this, I think they organizations struggling having that flexibility on being able to have that that operations model that can grow and be scalable with an organization. So to a certain extent, having like this young, let's say, accountability across the processes helps them decouple their acting on a strategic transformation, on their journey they're going through on, continuously having to tackle the challenges they have, decouple it from the current, let's say, organizational situation, because it's like growing and changing and evolving. But I think for the top level sponsors, they want to have like a virtual metrics organization they can grab onto and say, I need my operation to change, adapt, and I need some accountability here. So I think it's something that that really strongly resonates with these sponsors.
Yeah, and on top of that, one of the tricks I typically tell my customers as well is, listen, if you want your BPM initiative to be successful, trying to find that one or two strategic initiatives that they've defined, and you can find them in every annual report within the first 10 pages. Find them and connect to one or two of those where you have that clear connection to say, okay, so we want, as an example, we want to engage and grow in operational excellence. Well, operational excellence thrives on having a process management minded mindset, so to speak. So if you can elaborate and if you can articulate to an executive level like a management board on what the advantages is of BPM to help them achieve their strategic targets, you will have their ear, and it will become even much more simpler to communicate the reason why you need to engage with BPM and why are we doing this. Yes, because we want to achieve our strategic goals, and they are enabled, supported, facilitated, whatever the word is you want to choose, via the BPM philosophy. So that can help. And that's one way to make your executive sponsor, I would fall in love with BPM, because it's a courtship in the end.
I know that's a very good example. And I also had one of my consultants, and we were looking at a maturity model for a company, and they want to realign their business BPM initiative and define the strategic goals. And they were saying, how should we do that? Should we take like these more generic objectives for BPM? And I said, no, look, come on, just check the website. I said, check the website.
Yeah, exactly.
Website. And go to the, let's say, PR investor relations site, and just look what the key topics are that they communicate to the outside world, that they stand. What is their mission? What do they really stand for? And there's this one utilities company, and clearly everything around sustainability and environment, and they have these some other things around procurement, that they, make sure that their, sourcing partners are also compliant and certified. I said, just take these 4 topics, and each one you argue, what is the value of process management in the context of sustainability? Why the processes and transparency around the processes and the risk and controls that need to be managed on all these processes. Where do they play, and then we tell the story from there. And so exactly as you say, so don't get out of the box of the classical, more generic principles of BPM, where it brings like generic value, like transparency and and whatever there is there. And there's a lot there. It's all valuable. Put it in context to the strategic pains that these sponsors have. If it's a CFO, maybe more financial related, but they also have a lot of compliance topics on their plate.
Absolutely.
CEO, more around his operations, or after they have growth strategy. So how are we going to support the merger acquisition, due diligence, like topics that the CEO may have in his growth strategy, or is it more around competitiveness and customer satisfaction? There's all these high level topics where you say, look, now to break that down and say exactly what your initiative is going to help do better in the future, and that's how I think you get a good baseline on, and also identifying priorities in the initiatives you can do with BPM. Ultimately, which pilot you're going to pull out to prove your point.
Yeah, absolutely. And then just to stay on the topic of the executive sponsor, might be good to just give a couple of arguments why you would need one, and then what I mean by that is, what are the good things that an executive sponsor can do for you? Imagine that you run a BPM project. So you are either the head of BPM, or you might even be, if you're in a mature company, you might be the global process owner for BPM. What can the executive sponsor do for you? Well, I think first of all, and first and foremost, alignment with the rest of the executive level people. Because even if your executive sponsor is a CFO, you still have a CEO, a COO, a CDO, God knows, a CHRO, whatever we have nowadays. They are on the board as well. And they need to stay aligned to why are you doing and why are you engaging in BPM. So that alignment is I think, one of the key tasks that the executive sponsor should be doing. Another one is, if you go one level down, so we're starting from this ideal world where you have an executive sponsor at the very top, which is not always the case, but let's start from there. And then just transpose it levels down if you need to. Another one that I think is really important is where the executive sponsor makes sure that he is the escalation resolution point for anything that happens on the lower levels. So imagine that you have a multinational company with various different business groups. Each of these business groups has typically a president or a vice president, but somebody who runs the business group. And you want those persons to see BPM as something that can help them instead of something that endangers their local kingdom. Because you all know, when there's a business group structure, there will be local kingdoms. And you will have people who think, well, this is my turf and you're not getting on it. So that is something that an executive sponsor, I think, should be doing, is opening doors for you and making sure that the rest of the organization is ready for when you come along and say, okay, so let's talk about BPM and how are we going to implement this. And then two other ones, and then I'll give the word back to you, Russell, to see how you think about that. The third one, I would say, is that your executive sponsor should ideally also function as the chairman of your process governance board or process architecture board, whatever you want to call that, the group of wise people that own the processes. And finally, if you have a head of BPM or you have a global process owner of BPM, that's exactly where your executive sponsor has support. He needs to support those people and say, okay, so what do you need? Besides, of course, checking up on progress and saying, listen, are we according to plan? But also, where can I help to take away bottlenecks? And if you add that up into one picture, you'll see that your executive sponsor is pretty much a very important big spider in the web. And without it, there is no web, if you catch my drift.
Absolutely. So I agree, and I like the way you're putting in these different levels and areas that he needs to maybe open the door or make sure people do get the support that initially they were may have committed to, but then when it gets down to real business and providing resources or input, then things can get quite tacky. And I think that's one thing when setting up the initiative, it's always clear. So what you need, you definitely will always need the input from the business, and so you need some collaboration here. And along the road, you start defining then your roles, like the ownership. So you have to somehow allocate, nominate people that actually act on ownership level. And that's not going to happen if you don't have an executive sponsor actually.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, just say the classical order to cash, and you're saying, is it sales?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And then you come up with your role description of, okay, what are the skills we expect? What are the tasks? And then the first question is always, well, how much of that my time? Am I going to get a second salary?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Then you need the executive sponsor to raise his eyebrow.
Yeah.
Just and say, oh yeah. Is this the attitude? No, but to bring in this balance of saying, and this is something around these roles that you need to allocate, and I think on the ownership side of the process ownership level, it's a different. You're talking to other people there. They really. And then sometimes there's this, it's more work for me, but then some people, they understand, this is somehow like a bit of a power, I can claim ownership here. So some people really jump on it in a positive or a negative manner. But I think here, as soon as the sponsor actually just slightly communicates, this is the role I want to have established, for these and these reasons. Yeah. then the whole discussion, the dynamics around the GPOs claiming these roles rather than actually just, pushing back on is this additional work changes dramatically.
Yeah.
So it's then it's more something that at some time you do need to take sometimes political decisions on who does the sponsor see as the ideal candidate, because not necessarily has the most dominant domain, for example, in end-to-end, but because the certain skills of communication, collaboration, of an integrative thinking, strategic thinking is more, more suitable to this candidate than somebody else's. And here also the sponsors have they know their people on that level.
Oh, that's absolutely true, Russell. And I think that when we get to the governance part of our framework, we're going to have much more in-depth discussions around that one, because I think the ownership of an end-to-end process in and by itself is, well, I would say a point of debate for many organizations. And we could spend some wisdom on that. I also think that we, somewhere in episode 1, we try to say, well, we're going to stick to about 20, 25 minutes for each episode. So we better wrap this one up, to be honest. So we don't keep people too long from what they're doing instead of listening to us. Any last words on the executive sponsor, Russell, before we close up this one?
Yeah, maybe just summarized. I think it's obvious that it's such a vital element for success in a BPM initiative, like many other initiatives. The ideal world is of course the higher and the more clearer this sponsorship is communicated, the better. Grabbing the attention and resonating with the sponsorship level, whatever level he is and whichever person you can address, is really to reflect what the value of BPM is in the context of his personal or her personal pains that she has on a strategic level. And there's lots and lots of points you can dig in there, but it's I think that summarize, it's very important that you do not take BPM as something that is just that is so obvious to other parties. So people that are working with BPM a long time, they get it and they're really into it. But you have to, go out and say, what is the value of the service this offers to whoever we're talking to, but here specifically the executive sponsor on a strategic level, and really continuously work on that value contribution of BPM to the organization. And then with whatever executive sponsor you have on which level, then exactly really work and talk to him openly about the support he can offer and has to offer in order to support you. And I think, when you have them as a sponsor, they get it and they know their organization best, they know how to communicate with them best, and they can give you also exactly the advice that you need to be successful on your initiative. So it's not somebody who just opens up the money and gives budget, but it really is a partnership where you also can grow on the inputs from sponsors. And I think you've also seen some great executive sponsors.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And that just, sometimes really, be called on their maybe wisdom on, how to make things happen on a corporate level.
I think that the best ones, they practice what they preach, because that is such a powerful behavioral role modeling function that we even didn't touch upon today. But that wise words, Russell. Thank you for that. Let's reconvene for episode number 3.
Super.
All right. Thanks. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye-bye.